you could view it two ways, right? There's like, what are the barriers to building this type of housing more throughout Southern California? Or you could see it as like, what are the things we can do, right? Where we can advocate to try to make it easier to build this type of housing that we think will serve families. So one is zoning, right? So we mentioned earlier this pink map, right? On most residential properties in Los Angeles and Orange County, it's just literally illegal to build this type of housing because it's starting to change because of things that the state is doing. But most cities are like, yeah, we're not really interested in that. We just want traditional, what people in Southern California tend to think of the dream, right? Large lot, single family home, yard, right? So you can only build that type of housing. That's the mandate from local governments. The second is you have to be able to approve these projects quickly. So for it to make sense for a developer to build this housing, if it's going to take, like I have a friend who was working on he was a land use consultant, so he helps developers build projects. And there's a project in Robertson, mid-Robertson, so near like the Grove, so like a kind of wealthy area in mid-city LA. And they had, the person he was consulting had to go through 6 hearings to build about 10 houses on his property. So planning commission, city plum, planning and land use. And after the 6th one, he's like, I'm done. I quit. I'm going to sell and like do something else with it, right? He didn't even get that far. So he didn't even get the zoning approved. But yes, then he would have had to gone through another layer, which is building and safety, which we're going to talk about in a second. And so if it's going to take you years and 6 hearings, you're just not going to bother because these projects are not profitable enough to put up with that level of time, right? That's where the thing I posted in the WhatsApp group the other day, where 100 units of housing became a Taco Bell, right? I have nothing against Taco Bell. I spent a lot of my teens and 20s eating a lot of Taco Bell. But right, we need a lot of housing, but building Taco Bells, if it's more profitable, people are just going to build Taco Bells, right? But it does fold into the next one, which is reducing costs, right? So a lot of times these projects, and this is a lot of what we're going to talk about today, they have rules in the building code or fees that are charged that, again, make them infeasible to build. And then lastly, you need to make condos easier. So in California, it's really hard to build, or it's really hard for builders to sell things to people as condominiums as opposed to rentals. And so this year, at the state level, we're going to be working on legislation that addresses each of these, right? So flexible zoning, reducing costs, and condos. I'm going to talk about that. And then we had one that has already died. That was going to be one of our key priorities. It died this week, sadly. We'll talk about that briefly. So the first strategy is zoning reform, right? So we talked about how it's illegal to build a lot of these projects. One thing that we're trying to focus on right now is the state is trying to clear pathways to make it easier to build, specifically townhouses, right, in local cities. And I think the model example of this is in Houston, Texas, where they, in 1998, made it easier across the city to build townhouses by basically saying, right now, when you build a single family home, you have to have a large lot. We're going to say you can do it on a small lot. And so what's happened, this is actually a neighborhood in Houston. You've had older homes like this turned into multiple homes that look like this, right? They're a series of townhouses. And the big advantage there is that they actually end up being a lot cheaper, right? So this is a comparison. This is where Houston ranks, right? So this is LA, right? How expensive housing is, almost close to $1 million, the median home price. In Houston, right? It's still short of $300,000, the median home price. And it's one of the cheapest cities in the whole US. This isn't the only reason it's that way. They literally don't have a zoning code in Houston. That's
regulations, right?
But this one particular thing, like townhouses, they still had a law in the books that prevented you from building it. So when they relaxed it, you saw a ton of housing that was a lot cheaper. So the median townhome that's been built in the last 20 years in Houston, the cost of it is $340,000, right? Imagine if LA was building new homes that cost that much, right? Now the median single family home that's been built over the last 2 decades is $545,000, right? So it's a lot more expensive because of the additional land that you have to carry. What's cool though is that just because that's the median doesn't mean you can't find cheaper options. So the 25th percentile of townhome that's been built in Houston is actually $213,000, right? That's even more attainable, right, for like a working family, right, compared to 500 plus. And I'll just throw in housing is spelled wrong there. Didn't catch that until just now. But one big thing that Houston has done as well, it's also been a much more effective city at responding to homelessness. And a big reason for that is that housing is more affordable in Houston. So they're more quickly able to place people in housing, and less people are pushed into homelessness by housing costs in the first place, right? So per capita rate of homelessness in Houston has actually been declining, right, for the last few decades, while it's been quickly escalating here in Los Angeles. Right, and a big reason is that actually the majority of people who are at risk of homelessness, they end up living not on their own, but with family, right? So it's about 60% of people who live with parents, other family members, or friends, right? So 60% of people who are at risk of being homeless because of their income level, they end up living with other people. And in Houston, right, guess what? A lot of them are fitting into the third bedrooms of these townhouses, right? Because they're cheap, because they're accessible, because a lot of people have them. In LA, the family that lives there doesn't have that third bedroom because they themselves can't afford the housing that they're in, right? So it's not just good for families, but it's also good for everyone in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
So in the state, they've been slowly chipping away to make it easier to build townhomes. So starting in 2023, they said that, hey, if you have a vacant lot in a single family neighborhood, 2024, you shut off the utilities, you can turn that home into townhomes, right? The adoption of it has been steadily going up since then. In 2025, they said, hey, if as part of that, you have a yard that you are okay getting rid of, you can turn that lot into a lot. You can turn that yard into its own separate lot, and then you can build townhomes on that lot. And so this year, we're kind of slowly moving the ball a little forward to make it easier to build townhomes by saying that, so what's key with townhomes, if you look at this picture, the economics of a townhome really make a lot more sense when you can go up to the third story, right? Because if you have parking on the ground level, that means you still have 2 levels of where people can live. And most people in LA are still going to want a place to park their car. So that's really, that can be really important, having 3 levels of height. And then setbacks, right? So setbacks means if this is my property line, how closely to that property line can I build? Townhomes make a lot more sense when you shrink that setback and you allow people to build next to the other house, as opposed to right now where it's like, oh, you have to allow like 10 feet, right? And it's like, okay, well now you don't have a big enough place to put housing.